Does this CEO's ex-wife hide his secret kids? Hey, lovely people. Welcome back to Alcott Stories, where love gets messy, secrets unravel, and second chances hit you right in the heart. Today's story, it's got everything. A powerful CEO, a mysterious ex-wife, and a single cryptic post that may have just revealed a life-altering secret. Does this CEO's ex-wife hide his children from him? Trust me, you're going to want to stick around till the end for this emotional roller coaster of betrayal, regret, and a love that refuses to die. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to Alcott Stories and tap the bell so you never miss a tale that just might break or heal your heart. Now grab your tea, find a cozy spot, and let's begin. The morning the internet caught fire started like any other for Alex Smith, coffee in hand, blue eyes scrolling through headlines he had no interest in, but then her name appeared, bold, blazing, impossible to ignore, Rachel. His heart stuttered before his thumb tapped the screen. A single post, 10 words, and one emoji had shattered the quiet he'd spent a year building. Gratitude for my 3 miracles. Just like that, speculation erupted like a match to gasoline. The comment section exploded. Who are the 3 miracles? Are they her children? Did she remarry? And most jarringly, are they Alex's? His name trended within minutes. News sites scrambled, influencers dissected, and conspiracy channels spun webs faster than truth could travel. Rachel hadn't shown her face in weeks, yet suddenly the world couldn't stop talking about her. Paparazzi staked out her apartment. Drones hovered near her roof, and curious eyes searched every photo she'd ever posted for clues. Somewhere between a blurred park bench and a reflection in a cafe window, people swore they saw little feet, tiny hands, silhouettes of children hiding in plain sight. But none of it compared to the silence from Rachel herself. No clarification, no denial, just that single haunting phrase hanging in digital eternity. Alex, miles away in his glass-walled penthouse, read the post again, then again, his chest tightening. 3 miracles, he muttered, leaning forward. The words weren't poetic, they were piercing and deeply personal. His mind spun like a glitching server. Rachel had only been pregnant once, or so he thought. The memory hit him hard, her standing barefoot in their kitchen, holding a tiny white stick, eyes wide with both joy and fear. They had cried together that day, wrapped in an embrace that felt like forever. But forever had unraveled fast. Fame, expectations, his obsessive need to conquer the tech world, her growing loneliness, all of it built a chasm they eventually fell into. And when she left, she didn't just walk away from him, she vanished like smoke from a dream. He hadn't seen her since the final court date, where she stood stone-faced, signing away the title of Mrs. Smith, but keeping something in her eyes that haunted him still. Now that same look flashed in her cryptic post. Not just gratitude, a quiet challenge, a whisper of secrets not meant to stay buried. And beneath the polished exterior of Alex Smith, the calculated CEO, the media darling, was a man unraveling. He locked his phone and stared out the window at the city he once felt invincible in. Were there children out there with his eyes? His blood? His last name hidden, erased, or never even given? Questions swarmed him like wasps, angry and loud. He remembered the time Rachel spent in the guest room near the end. Her tear-streaked face at midnight, her refusal to talk, his failure to ask the right things. Was that when she discovered the pregnancy? Or were there 2? Had she carried twins and told no one? Or had she adopted afterward to fill the void he left? Every scenario pierced deeper than the last. The media, of course, didn't care about nuance. Headlines screamed betrayal, secrets, scandal. Pundits debated morality while tabloids invented timelines. But to Alex, it wasn't about PR. It was about pain, about loss, about the terrifying idea that he might be a father and never even knew it. He opened her Instagram again, not to read the caption, but to study the photo, the ocean behind her, a sun hat shielding her eyes. And in the corner, barely visible, a child's hand clutching her dress. He zoomed in until the pixels blurred, heart pounding. His assistant buzzed in, reminding him of a board meeting, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The business empire he built suddenly felt hollow. The IPO numbers, the buyouts, The Forbes covers, all meaningless, next to the possibility of flesh and blood he never held. He thought of his own childhood, a cold mansion filled with nannies and absence, and wondered if that legacy had repeated itself without his knowledge. He tried to call her twice, but the line went straight to voicemail. "Rachel, it's me," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw your post. We need to talk, please." But would she answer? Would she forgive? Did she hate him? Or was she protecting something more sacred than resentment? Was she protecting their children? The word stuck in his throat. Children, plural, a concept that had never been real until now. He stared at himself in the mirror, no longer seeing the confident CEO, but a man stripped bare. And in that raw moment, as his reflection blurred behind unshed tears, he whispered, "What did I miss?" Across the city, Rachel stood at a window too, her phone buzzing silently on the counter. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of truth pressing against years of silence. She'd kept the secret to protect them, to protect herself. But she also knew secrets didn't stay buried, not forever. And somewhere deep down, a part of her had hoped this day would come, that he would see the truth, not through scandal, but through love, through the bond that once made them inseparable. She closed her eyes, remembering his laughter, his promises, and the night. She almost told him but couldn't. A single tear escaped down her cheek. Outside, the world screamed for answers. But inside, two hearts, once torn apart, began beating toward something inevitable. Rachel stayed frozen by the window, the sunlight warming her face, while the storm behind her eyes deepened, memories clawing their way to the surface. As the soft sound of children laughing echoed faintly down the hallway, she didn't reach for her phone, not yet, because hearing his voice after all this time had opened a part of her she'd buried years ago. It wasn't just a call. It was a reminder of what they'd once shared, before everything went dark, before secrets, before silence. The last time she saw Alex, they weren't enemies, not entirely, just two exhausted lovers watching their perfect life unravel, thread by thread. It hadn't started with bitterness. No, it began like a fairy tale neither of them saw coming. Rachel had been wearing a second-hand blue dress with a tear stitched clumsily near the hem when she walked into the gala, where her best friend forced her to network. Alex stood on the other side of the room, laughing with investors, his suit pristine, his smile magnetic. She hadn't known who he was then, just that his eyes paused when they landed on her, like the world had stopped turning. One compliment led to 2 hours of conversation. 1 week turned into 7 straight dates. 1 month became a move-in. They were wildfire, burning too bright to last. But for a while, it felt like maybe love could be enough. He painted her art studio with his own hands. She sent him messages during meetings that made him blush. He whispered future children's names into her hair at night, like promises he didn't know he couldn't keep. But as his empire grew, so did the distance between them. Rachel tried to understand the pressure, how a man with the world on his shoulders couldn't always make it home for dinner. But missed birthdays, unanswered texts, and red-eyed arguments chipped away at their golden illusion. Then came the rumors, first whispers, then headlines, of Alex seen dining with models and investors far too often. Rachel asked him outright. He laughed it off. She stopped laughing back. She accused him of loving his company more than her. He called her dramatic, said she kept parts of herself hidden, that he couldn't fix what she wouldn't reveal. What he never understood was that her silence wasn't secrecy, it was fear. Fear of becoming invisible in his world. Fear of admitting how much she needed him to see her. Then came the night everything cracked. She found an unopened letter in his briefcase, the one she had left on his desk weeks ago, telling him about the test results. The 2 pink lines, the ultrasound referral. She waited for him to mention it. He never did. Whether he missed it or ignored it, she couldn't tell, but in that moment, she knew she and the baby weren't part of his plan. So she left quietly, without drama, without explanation. Just a note that read, "I'm choosing peace over pieces." She didn't expect him to chase her, he never did. The silence that followed screamed louder than any fight ever could. While Alex dazzled in boardrooms and media interviews, Rachel sat alone in a hospital room, with shaking hands and a racing heart, listening to a doctor list risks and due dates. She pressed her palms against her belly, whispering, "You're already so loved, even if he never knows you." Across town, Alex was unveiling his company's new AI breakthrough, thunderous applause drowning out the ache he didn't yet understand. He was sharp, articulate but not present. Something felt off, but he pushed it down like he always did. Rachel, meanwhile, painted lullabies onto canvas in between sobs, unsure if she hated him or missed him more. When complications arose in her second trimester, she gripped the hospital bed and screamed through the pain alone, imagining him there, holding her hand, whispering strength into her bones. But the only thing that held her together was the love growing inside her. She named them long before they were, born whispers of hope against the deafening silence of abandonment. Alex never knew. He signed papers, closed deals, bought a yacht he never sailed. His life looked perfect on paper, while hers was chaos stitched with courage. And still, despite it all, she never told the world the truth. Because it wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. About saving her children from the shadows that fame casts. About shielding them from the heartache of being known by a man too busy to care when it mattered. Yet now, years later, the truth buzzed in her pocket like a ghost refusing to rest. Rachel exhaled slowly, brushing a tear away as she turned from the window. Her children were playing with building blocks on the floor, unaware of the firestorm unraveling outside their home. She crouched beside them, tracing their curls, pressing a kiss to each forehead, her heart both full and fractured. Somewhere out there, Alex was hurting too, and for the first time, maybe he was ready to see her, not the polished ex-wife the media painted, but the mother who had broken silently to protect the future he never asked for. And though their love had died loudly in the public eye, behind closed doors it still lingered, fragile and flickering, daring to ask if there was still something left to save. Rachel's fingers lingered in her daughter's curls, as a small giggle filled the room, warm and oblivious, but outside their safe little world. The storm was forming faster than she'd feared. While she played house with truth hidden like precious gold, a TikTok user with too much time and too many followers stumbled upon her Instagram feed and zoomed in on a moment she never meant to share. A reflection in the sliding glass door behind her, where two small silhouettes stood half-shielded by a curtain. In another post, an arm reached into the frame, too small to be hers, holding a crayon-stained toy. The amateur detective circled the images in red and posted them with the bold caption, "Did Rachel Smith just soft-launch Secret Kids?" Within hours, it spread like digital wildfire. Every gossip page picked it up. Reaction videos flooded the internet. People analyzed photo lighting, pixel placement, and mirror angles with forensic obsession. The children were impossible to see clearly, but their features, their skin tones, their dark curls, their posture, spoke volumes to the curious and the cruel. Comments speculated wildly. Are they Alex's? Did she hide a whole family? One user posted a side-by-side of Alex's childhood photo and a blurry face from Rachel's latest post. The resemblance was haunting. His PR team launched into crisis mode, calling emergency meetings, flooding search engines with SEO-optimized rebuttals, crafting legal warnings that felt more like bandages on a hemorrhaging truth. They begged him to speak publicly, to deny paternity until facts were confirmed, to protect the company's image. But Alex didn't care about image anymore. He cared about those eyes, the ones that looked back at him through pixels with an expression too familiar to dismiss. He watched the TikTok loop 20 times, unable to look away. Every flicker of motion, every shadow, every childlike laugh in the background of her videos gnawed at him. Had she carried his children while he buried himself in work? Had she left not out of anger, but to protect them from a man too blind to see what mattered? The guilt roared louder than the headlines. He couldn't remember the last time he'd held Rachel's hand and truly listened. Couldn't pinpoint the moment she gave up trying. His fingers hovered over his phone again, his voice mail inbox still holding her silence like a bruise. Meanwhile, a journalist dug up court documents, showing sealed custody agreements and undisclosed financial trusts signed during the divorce. Speculation turned into semi-facts. The internet no longer asked if Rachel had hidden children. It now asked why. And that question, sharp and unforgiving, drove a stake through Alex's chest. He remembered once saying in anger that fatherhood would slow him down, that he wasn't ready to be a family man. He hadn't meant it. Or maybe he had. But the Alex back then wasn't the Alex, sitting now in his empty kitchen at 2 a.m., rewatching videos frame by frame, searching for pieces of himself in strangers. His mind kept going back to the photo of the little boy, with wide, curious eyes staring into the camera unintentionally, eyes that bore the weight of something unspoken. He whispered, "If you're mine, why would she keep you from me?" The pain tasted bitter on his tongue, not rage, remorse. He wasn't angry at Rachel anymore. He was angry at time, at choices, at silence. He began to question everything he once believed. Was Rachel's distance coldness, or quiet strength? Did she shield the truth not to hurt him, but to preserve the only thing she had left when their love collapsed? On the other side of the city, Rachel saw the same photos. She had locked her account, but it was too late. The screenshots lived on. She held her phone tightly, her jaw tense, knowing this moment would come, but dreading it all the same. She'd spent years crafting a quiet life, hiding joy behind curtain folds and cropping innocence out of every image. But truth, no matter how well hidden, always has a way of leaking through cracks. Her children asked why she seemed sad that day, and she smiled through glassy eyes, whispering, "Just tired, baby." But deep down she felt the world closing in. She knew Alex saw it by now, knew he'd recognize the eyes, the tilt of a smile, the way her daughter's hair curled exactly like his on humid days. She could feel him across the silence, trying to reach her not with words, but with grief. Back in his office, Alex pulled out an old photo album, the one he hadn't opened since the divorce, and traced their wedding photo with trembling fingers. Rachel's face beamed back at him, timeless and strong, the same way she looked now when shielding their children from a world that demanded to know what wasn't theirs to claim. And for the first time in a long while, he realized he didn't want the truth for the public. He wanted it for himself. Not for headlines, not for redemption, but for the quiet ache inside him that whispered of children he'd never held, birthdays he'd never attended, lullabies he'd never sung. He no longer cared if the world forgave him. He only wanted to know if it was too late for them to forgive him too. And as dawn crept through the city skyline, Alex made a decision not to clear his name, but to knock on her door and ask, not as a CEO or a public figure, but as a man who once promised forever and finally understood what it meant to mean it. Alex stood at the edge of dawn, the city still asleep beneath the haze of his thoughts, when an anonymous envelope slid beneath the door of his penthouse like a ghost refusing to knock. No return address, just his name typed neatly in all caps. He opened it with hands that trembled more than he'd admit, and what spilled out shattered what little denial he had left. Official documents, hospital records from a maternity ward on the outskirts of the city, dated just months after Rachel disappeared. Pediatric appointments signed under an alias he didn't recognize. And worst of all, a notarized trust fund document bearing his own signature in black ink, unshakable and real. The date matched the final week of their divorce, when he'd been signing stacks of legal paperwork without question, eager to escape the humiliation of a failed marriage. But this one he never read. Now, its contents revealed monthly deposits to a private account marked for minors, the kind of financial trail only the careful and desperate leave behind. His breath caught. Either Rachel forged his signature, or the truth had been sitting under his nose, buried beneath arrogance and assumption. Fury surged, not at her, but at himself. He stormed into his lawyer's office without warning, slamming the papers onto the polished desk with eyes wild and voice trembling. Did Rachel forge this? Did anyone read this? Why didn't you tell me? The lawyer looked pale, flipping through the pages, then quietly admitted that Alex had waived review of the trust agreement, that everything was technically legal, and that Rachel had requested discretion for personal reasons. Personal reasons. The phrase hit like a slap. He stumbled backward, choking on a mix of regret and disbelief, realizing he'd signed away a connection to children he never knew existed. Back at his penthouse, the weight of it all collapsed on top of him. He paced for hours, hands raking through his hair, the walls closing in like punishment. Every word Rachel never said suddenly echoed louder than the ones she did. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor, clutching the documents like they were bleeding, whispering her name as if it could reverse time. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked the silence. "I would have stayed. I would have fought for us." But maybe that was the cruelest irony. Maybe she knew he wouldn't have. Maybe she'd already begged in 100 quiet ways he ignored. The memory of her standing in doorways, eyes glassy, voice shaking, came rushing back with brutal clarity. He hadn't listened. He'd been too focused on profit margins and press conferences, too obsessed with control to see what was crumbling right in front of him. Now the truth was laid bare in ink and paperwork, cold and undeniable. There were children, not just rumors. Not maybe, not allegedly. There were children with his blood and her smile. He looked out at the city that once bowed to his name and felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. A man with influence but no legacy, no bedtime stories, no tiny feet running down hallways bearing his name. He traced the trust signature, the looping curve of the S in Smith, unmistakably his. It wasn't just the money that haunted him, it was the intention. Rachel hadn't stolen from him. She hadn't raged or exposed or blackmailed. She had protected, quietly, dignified, alone, while he signed deals and smiled at cameras. She was in waiting rooms and delivery beds, building a life in the shadows with pieces of the love he abandoned. The idea that he'd missed first words, first steps, scraped knees, whispered fears, bedtime songs. It broke something raw and unrecoverable inside him. He thought of the hospital bill dated just one day after he'd celebrated a product launch. The photo of him laughing beside a champagne tower now burned into his guilt. What was she doing that day? Was she in pain? Was she alone? Did she cry for him or curse his name? He didn't know. And that not knowing was the cruelest punishment of all. He cradled the documents to his chest like a lifeline too late thrown, whispering apologies to a woman who might never want to hear them. Outside, his phone buzzed endlessly, reporters, board members, agents, but he let it ring into oblivion. None of them mattered, not now, not when he finally understood what Rachel had sacrificed to protect what he had neglected. His children were real, living, breathing, laughing, growing without him. He had failed them before he even met them. He rose shakily, not as a CEO, not as a public figure, but as a man stripped of his own illusions. And somewhere inside that realization bloomed a resolve, not for control, not to reclaim his image, but to make it right if she'd let him, to become a father if he still had time, to speak truth even if he wasn't owed forgiveness. Because for once, it wasn't about what he lost, it was about what they never got to gain. Alex stood outside the small coastal house, his heart pounding louder than the waves crashing behind him, the salt air thick with tension and the weight of unspoken years. The path to her door felt longer than any runway or red carpet he'd ever walked, each step an echo of the man he used to be and the father he never got to become. When Rachel opened the door, barefoot and caught mid-motion, the shock on her face was not fear but recognition, like some distant part of her had known this moment would come. Her eyes locked with his, and neither of them moved. The silence between them carved from 1,000 unsaid words. "You came," she said softly, her voice unsure, like hope dressed in armor. He held up the envelope of documents with shaking hands, his jaw clenched. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, barely more than a whisper, the weight of pain etched into every syllable. Rachel stepped aside wordlessly, not out of invitation, but because confrontation was no longer avoidable. The living room was modest, lived-in, warm, toys on the carpet, a faint smell of cinnamon, and in the far corner, laughter, 3 children playing, unaware their world was about to tilt. Alex's breath hitched. One little boy with tousled blonde hair looked up, his eyes a mirror image of his own, and something inside him broke. Another boy, darker and taller, shot Rachel a teasing grin that made her roll. Her eyes in the same way she used to when Alex left socks on the floor. Then a girl with a cascade of wild curls spun in a circle, humming off key, her energy untamed and glowing with life. Alex's knees nearly gave out. "They're mine," he said, not as a question, but as a truth that hit him like a tidal wave. Rachel folded her arms, her stare as steady as it was fragile. "Two are yours," she said. "The third, I adopted. He needed a home. So did I." He tried to speak, but no words came. She filled the silence with the truth he'd ignored for too long. "I was pregnant when I left. I didn't want to leave, but I had to. You were chasing headlines, trying to prove you were more than just some rich kid with a silver spoon. And I was tired of being a shadow in your success story." Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers curled into fists at her side. "You stopped showing up. For dinners, for doctor's visits, for me. And I knew that if I told you about them then, you'd try to control it all. Rewrite the ending. Turn fatherhood into another PR campaign." Alex flinched, the accusation not unfair, just brutally honest. He looked back at the children, now wrestling over a toy, and saw his past, his mistakes, and his second chance all tangled into one. "I'm not that man anymore," he murmured. "Eyes still locked on the life he never got to live." Rachel's voice lowered, trembling for the first time. "But you were!" "And I had to choose, wait for you to maybe change, or start over with what was left of me." His gaze finally met hers, and what he saw wasn't hatred, but hurt layered over strength. "I didn't tell you," she whispered, "because I was scared you'd love them the way you stopped loving me." That sentence sliced deeper than anything else had. Alex took a step toward her, not daring to touch. "I never stopped," he said, his voice fraying. "I just didn't know how to keep loving you while I hated myself." The wind rattled the windows as the words settled between them. Rachel turned away, brushing a tear before it could fall, and exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. "You don't get to walk back in and fix this with apologies," she said, fierce and mother before anything else. "They're not a do-over. They're not an opportunity. They're people. My people." Alex nodded, ashamed, reverent, desperate. "I know. I'm not asking for permission to rewrite the past. I'm asking if there's space in the present for them to know me, to know I never meant to disappear." Rachel watched him closely. The guarded woman who had learned to stand alone and keep others breathing even while her own lungs collapsed. Behind her, the children called out, unaware of the history unfolding in the hallway. "They ask about their dad," she said quietly. "I never gave them a villain, just silence. Because I didn't want them to hate someone they'd never met." Alex choked on the realization that she'd protected him, even when she had every reason to do otherwise. "You gave me grace I didn't deserve," he said, voice cracking. "And now I just want to earn it." A long pause passed before Rachel finally said, "You'll have to earn it from them. Not from me." And that, more than anything, was the invitation he'd hoped for. Not reconciliation, not a romantic fairy tale, but a crack in the door wide enough for something new to begin. The door didn't swing wide open, but Rachel left it cracked. And that was enough for Alex to return, not with flowers or grand gestures, but with quiet consistency that spoke louder than any apology ever could. At first, he came just to sit on the porch watching the kids play, unsure where he belonged, but certain he wanted to be near them. He brought books he thought they'd like, mismatched snacks, and a baseball glove still stiff with price tags. His voice was softer now, stripped of ego, uncertain and raw, asking questions he once would have filled with assumptions. He forgot how to talk to children, but they reminded him gently, with sticky fingers, spontaneous hugs and relentless honesty. His daughter asked why he blinked too much when he tried to tell stories, and he laughed for the first time in weeks. He learned how to braid her hair by watching YouTube tutorials at 2 a.m., then practicing on a teddy bear before asking if he could try on her curls. She sat still like royalty, correcting him gently, smiling at his clumsy fingers. His eldest son, quiet at first, eventually asked him to help with baseball. Alex fumbled the bat, nearly dropped the glove, but kept showing up every afternoon, every missed catch, every shy high five. Rachel watched it all from a cautious distance, arms folded, heart beating at the edge of every laugh she heard from the backyard. She didn't intervene, didn't praise, didn't interrupt. She simply observed, unsure whether she was witnessing transformation or a temporary performance. But something in his eyes told her this was not for show. This was a man unraveling and rebuilding, one bedtime story at a time. The turning point came one rainy Sunday, when the youngest, her adopted son, wild and fearless, ran to Alex, wrapping his arms around his legs, shouting, "Daddy!" like it was the only word that ever mattered. Time stopped. Alex froze, tears threatening as he bent down, looking into eyes that didn't match his, but still reflected something sacred. Rachel saw it from the hallway and nearly dropped the plate in her hands. She turned away quickly, but the moment was carved into her chest. The man who once disappeared now stood drenched in love. He hadn't earned but refused to run from. Days passed, then weeks. Then one evening, Alex was invited to deliver a keynote at a major tech gala, a celebration of innovation, legacy, and leadership. He arrived in a crisp suit, but brought none of the bravado he used to wear like armor. Cameras flashed. Applause roared. But when he stepped up to the mic, his voice trembled not with nerves but emotion. "For years," he began, "I believed my worth was measured in algorithms and IPOs. I built systems to change the world. But I never paused to be present in the one that truly mattered. My greatest invention," he said, his voice cracking, "is not software. It's my second chance at being a father." He held up a photo of the 3 children, smiling, tangled in each other on a picnic blanket. "This is my legacy," he said, and the room went still. The broadcast streamed live, and Rachel sat alone on the living room couch, frozen as his words echoed into her heart. She hadn't expected to cry, but she did, messy, silent tears that spilled without permission. All this time she had waited to be seen, not by the world, but by the man who once loved ambition more than intimacy. And now here he was, giving their story back to her, not in private, but before the eyes of the world. The children were asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, the internet ablaze with praise. But Rachel didn't open any of them. She just picked up her phone and stared at his name in her contacts, thumb hovering for seconds that felt like centuries. Then finally, with her voice barely above a whisper, she spoke the words she never thought she'd say again: "Come home, if you still want to." And for the first time in a long time, her voice didn't crack from fear, it cracked from hope. When Alex heard her voice on the other end of the line, soft, uncertain, but unmistakably real, everything inside him stilled, like the world had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. He didn't respond right away. His heart was pounding too loud for words. But he packed a small overnight bag like a man who wasn't visiting but returning. And within the hour, he stood again at the threshold of the home he once watched from a distance. This time welcomed not with suspicion, but with the warmth of possibility. Rachel opened the door before he could knock, her eyes tired but shining, and they simply stared at each other. No dramatic declarations, no desperate embraces, just 2 people who had weathered different storms, but somehow found the same shore. The children shouted his name from the living room, their little feet thudding against the floor as they raced toward him. And when their arms wrapped around his legs, Alex dropped to his knees, tears streaming freely, no longer afraid of being seen undone. Over the weeks that followed, life unfolded in moments both ordinary and monumental. He helped with homework, burned pancakes, learned which child needed extra cuddles before bed and which one liked their stories, read in funny voices. Rachel watched him with guarded awe, as if trying to reconcile the man she once loved with the father, now sleeping on the couch because the youngest refused to nap without him nearby. They didn't rush anything, didn't try to force what once broke them. They simply rebuilt, not with blueprints of the past, but with new bricks forged in truth, vulnerability and patience. It was in the way he kissed her forehead after loading the dishwasher, or how she wordlessly reached for his hand during school plays. It was healing in small, consistent gestures, her shoulder against his on the porch swing, his hoodie draped over her chair on chilly nights. And then one morning, with no cameras, no crowds, just their feet in the sand and the ocean humming behind them, Alex knelt again, not in desperation, but devotion. "Let's start over," he whispered. "Not from the beginning, but from right here, where we finally understand what love costs and why it's worth everything." Rachel laughed through tears, barefoot in a linen dress, hair tangled by wind, and simply said, "Only if I get to keep all of you this time." They married quietly, with the children tossing flower petals and building sandcastles nearby. And when the vows were spoken, they didn't promise perfection, they promised presence. As the sun melted into the horizon, Alex kissed her hand and whispered, "This time I'll never let go." And Rachel, eyes full of the woman she had become, not just a mother or a muse or a memory, but her whole self, replied, "This time, you already held everything that mattered." Their friends took photos, but it was the candid ones they cherished most. Their daughter asleep in Rachel's lap, one son poking seaweed at the other, Alex reaching for his wife's hand without realizing it. Later that night, after the children had drifted off to sleep, Rachel sat on the edge of their bed, the sea breeze curling through the window, and drafted a post she never thought she'd write. It wasn't polished or poetic, just true. A simple caption, beneath a picture of their joined hands and barefoot footprints in the sand. "The hardest goodbyes give birth to the most beautiful hellos." The internet, once wild with speculation, now erupted in joy. But neither of them needed validation anymore. They had lived the pain, survived the fracture, and found their way not to where they were, but to who they were meant to be. And as Alex wrapped his arms around her that night, the stars blinking like quiet witnesses above them, they both knew they hadn't rewritten their past. They had rewritten their ending.